hopefully everybody can hear me. Usually I do have a fairly loud voice, and there's also the help of a microphone, so you might end up being deafened. And as you can see, the talk is about the journey of grief. And the reason that I started on that is for a multitude of things. The first thing is that, it should come up in a moment. Well, the first thing we have is it's showing, but as the next slide, but the next, oh, hang on a minute, I'll come down here and use the mouse. It's working on the mouse, it's not working on the arrow. Oh, right, okay, super. So this book is about grieving, how we grieve, etc. And we're a funny society because everybody's born at some point, and we have this wonderful, we want to celebrate a pregnant mum, a new baby in a pram, all the joy, all the excitement, etc. And we want to do that. And then we have the only other given in our lives is that either ourselves, in which case we don't really become aware of it, or within our family, we will experience grief, we will experience a death. And it's not rocket science, it's there for us all, but as a society we've become, I suppose you could say we've become very sophisticated. We don't like talking about things that are uncomfortable, a bit painful. We're very mindful of other people's feelings. We're not very good at it anymore, but I'll come to that bit further along. So just to explain, the book is a product of various experiences, and as we go through life, you might experience, as a smaller child, death of a grandparent first. It could be death of a loss of a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a child, some other family member. And please don't ignore pets, because some people have said to me, I'm ashamed, I'm so distraught at the death of a pet. For many people, a pet can be the most important other in their lives, and can be a special friend. So of course you mourn a pet as well. And the other thing is, when you're in a situation of separation or divorce, similar thing, you're experiencing loss, you need to grieve, you need time to adjust to a new way of living. So grief and grieving comes into a lot of different things. But looking specifically at death, you can have a sudden death. In my case, my husband was 52, went out saying, bye dear, have a nice day, having a shared breakfast. And the next time I saw him was that evening, identifying his body in the mortuary. He dropped dead. This was in Scotland, in Edinburgh, on his way to a business meeting. And that is how fragile life can be. Because you got out of your bed this morning, any of us, myself included, nobody's guaranteed that you're simply going to tuck yourself back in under the blankets and sheets or whatever tonight. But we can't live like that. That's far too intense. But it is the reality of it. And I think partly what we don't do, we've become so anxious about the state of society, COVID, all the current financial messes that are around. We forget to literally luxuriate in the fact we have life. And the worst thing I had to do was phone my two daughters. One was in London, one was in Australia, not to say, sorry, your father's in hospital, a bit ill. I was phoning them to say, sorry, your father's dead. Now, that is not a nice, if you've ever had to do it, which I'm sure everybody here will have had some experience of death and grieving, and it's not pleasant. I've also had a lot of close friends, and they have had a long, slow, lingering death. I lost two very, very close friends in the last 5 years. And that is equally difficult and traumatic. I'm sure some of you here have experienced that, because you're having to watch the slow decline in someone you love and care for. And also it reaches a stage where really you want the sadness for them to end almost. And that's a tricky one to come to terms with as well, the balance there. So we all experience some type of loss. With others, it may have been one from your childhood, it may have been a different type of accident, etc. But the experiences are within ourselves. And I always say to people, men especially, will be, oh, well, but, you know, I'd be ashamed. I don't like talking about it, or I'll end up in tears. I always think tears are just a sign that you have cared and loved somebody very much. So what on earth do you begin to apologise for them for? And society, again, sort of expects people that maybe after the first week or two it's acceptable, then gradually, well, are you not getting, you know, over it better, etc. We're not very kind to people who are grieving. We don't treat it as actually an important process to go through. So what is my background? And hopefully this one. Yeah, there we go. My background, I was a chartered psychologist, and I see two of my previous work colleagues lurking in the audience, which is lovely to catch up again. And I especially when I was in Scotland working, I worked there for many years and then came back to Northern Ireland and worked with the Belfast Board. I would have been sent in if a young person had literally died on a playing field, or a young child, 5 or 6, had died in their sleep during the night, or a teacher had died, but I would have gone in to counsel either parents, teachers, pupils, whatever. So I had that background. I also trained in Scotland as a cruise bereavement counsellor and experienced lots of different types of very traumatic deaths, sometimes just sad deaths where there was no particular reason for it, which is another difficulty to accept. I had my own experience as a widow, and how that the process you have to go through. The fact that I was a psychologist and had been dealing with the death of others meant absolutely hee-haw with regard to me then processing and going through the pain and the agony. You can know all the information you like, but when it's your own feelings and your own pain, forget it. It will be just as difficult for you as for anybody else, and that's what I found. And then also, I was a co-writer on the authority guidelines in Scotland for my local authority, because as I'm sure you all are aware, Dunblane 1996, there were, I think it was 16 little primary ones, age 5, 6, and they were shot and killed in their school on a morning. So that was exceedingly traumatic, and the fallout from that, and for parents, for the security in schools, and a lot of the present day security in schools stems from that. But we had to write, each authority had to write guidelines about how they would keep schools secure, what would happen if there was a traumatic incident. For example, a school trip away, sometimes it happens that there's something that the reporters, TV news, want to come and bombard a school about. So those were the guidelines. So what I did was, I sort of, when my husband died, and this goes on to the next slide, my way of dealing with it, because I like words, people who know me well would say I like too many words and I talk too much. It's a flaw in my character that I haven't managed to get rid of yet. But I kept a diary for the year, simply because, not on day one, but from day 2, my only way of gaining a bit of sanity, if it was that, was simply writing down how I was feeling. And I still have the little jotter, nothing exotic. It was a little green regulation school jotter type of thing I picked up somewhere on my travels. And I filled it in and wrote down all the feelings and where I was at. So that was a concept. If I still got the jotter, that is not the book that you see, well, you see it at the back of the room. Because what I did was, it's not my personal story. I then made an amalgam of all the different bereavement experiences that I had been witness to, People vary hugely in their feelings, vary hugely in how they can cope. And that's okay, because we're all totally individual. And it's totally okay, whatever phase you're at in trying to process information. So it's written in the form of a diary, though, because the first thing that happens when you're grieving is your ability to concentrate and your memory goes. You're just all over the place, really. So I found it a little short paragraph is enough to read. It is nothing like anything academic. It's simply a little short paragraph describing your feelings and what you might be feeling like. And then there's a couple of lines, you'll see a page a bit further along, a couple of lines at the bottom talking about self-care, how you might look after yourself, because that's important. Because especially in early days of grief and bereavement, it can be difficult to remember to eat, to remember to sleep, to be able to sleep. Loads of different things impact on your well-being. And there's 365 pages, obviously, and the title of the book, One Day at a Time. Now, I knew there was the good old Lena Martell song, which I will not dare attempt to sing, One Day at a Time, but I discovered once I'd titled the book, etc., that was printed, there must be about 30 different things all called One Day at a Time. It's very, very common title. So the process of grief. And this will vary. Please don't look at it and say, oh, well, that isn't what happened to me. I'm just summarising the general phases that might happen. Initially, even if it's an expected death, and we literally just lost a close friend a week ago, and it was just about this time last year we lost another friend through a long, slow death. And so there is initially, even though you know it's coming, you still have that numbness and shock, the finality that actually is it. Then gradually the pain sets in, and when I say pain, some of you might well appreciate what I'm saying, but it's the sort of pain I can remember a few nights almost hitting my head off the door frame into the bathroom thinking, how will I cope? What will I do? It washes over you and almost knocks the feet from under you. And it can happen to you at any time in life, and there's no good time, because every stage of losing someone is sore. And we feel the pain, and that's why it's called heartache, or your heart is broken, because it is a physical pain in you. And people who have lost, for various reasons, in relationships, etc., if you've lost people, you'll have similar feelings. That is quite normal. You're grieving. So sometimes then you go on to anger, and the anger can be very strong. This isn't fair. Why did this have to happen, etc. And I suppose we ask the question sometimes, that classic, well, why me? Why did this happen to me? And unfortunately, the only answer to that is, why should it happen to you? Nobody's got any golden ticket that says you will avoid grieving. Remember, if you're grieving, you've loved somebody. So do you want to not have loved anybody? Because then, well, you don't have to feel pain and grief. And then you can go into what if? What if I'd called the doctor earlier? What if the ambulance men hadn't been on strike? What if COVID hadn't happened, which was a major source of grief for a lot of people as well? If only I'd done this, if only I'd made sure that they'd taken their pills that morning or whatever. Death finds you whether you like it or not. And you can tear yourself apart with what ifs and if onlys. Sometimes it helps people because they then develop a cause. They want to promote a particular illness or a particular issue. And that helps give them strength and keep them going. And that's okay too. We're also very different in what other people sort of hold their grief within themselves and are very private about it and don't want to talk about it. So if I go on to the next one, Society has changed, and we all know that. I keep swearing at the computer, and I look at my grandchildren who just sort of go, oh, and I feel an utter twit. But anyway, 50, 70 years ago, I'm sure even when any of us were small, you remember death in the street, in the next street, in the village, in the town. It was part and parcel of our life. And it was a mixture. It could be childhood illnesses, it could be working accidents. There was death in and around the communities. What we've moved to nowadays is, because we've become so much more within medicine, quite often death will happen in a hospital or it will happen in a hospice, but it's somewhere out there. It's not necessarily within the house. And some villages and towns still have people who will set out a body and lay out a body when someone has died. Society, if you'll see on the news at the moment with Turkey and the terrible, terrible grief and catastrophe there, some cultures will weep and wail. And if you're a very developed country, you might look at it and think, well, why are they doing that? That's not much point. It's their way of dealing with grief. Very physically letting the grief out, letting the pain out. Now, that is one way of dealing with it. There is nothing wrong with that. And then you have, for example, some systems over here in Northern Ireland, you will have a church service, then a burial, or a church service and a cremation, or just a cremation. The Irish system of having a wake is part of acknowledging the death has happened, where, and I'm sure lots of you, I remember as well, you know, the coffin is there in the middle of the mourners and the cups of tea and maybe a glass of something or two, and people are talking, and one minute they're crying, next minute they're sharing a sad story about the person. And it's like, it's probably the nearest thing to a party nearly that you can get. But it's a very healthy way of letting people get out all their feelings. But when it's very sanitized and we have this short service and that's them away, sometimes you're left with more grief stuck in you because you haven't really found a way to release it and let it out. So sometimes I've often said to people, even if you have a lot of things you want to say, either write it down on a piece of paper or actually pop a picture of whoever it is that you have lost and you're grieving for in front of you and talk to the picture. It is not that you're going mad. It is perfectly acceptable. It's a representation of the person. If you feel you can't, some people feel distressed still looking at pictures, plonk a cushion up with a soft toy on it or whatever, talk to the cushion. It's not going mad. It's anything that facilitates you saying, this is what I want to say. Now, there have been times, I remember about 2 or 3 months after my husband died, a toilet leaked. Never ever having had a toilet leak before. The gas fire decided to break down. And the third thing, something to do with the lawnmower stopped working. And I remember literally saying, would you just stop this? I can't take anymore. Don't give me any more. And I was beyond myself in a mixture of anger, rage, upset because I didn't know how to cope with it all. You can't get away from your feelings, but they're so much better if you can let them out. Otherwise, they sit in there like a tight ball inside you, and that traps you in your grief. And grief should be a process you can gradually move through. We all do it at a different time. We don't all do it in the same way. But those huge waves that come at the beginning and knock you over gradually get lesser, they get more spread apart, and so it's less often you get upset. I mean, to this day, and it's 20 years since my husband died, if I hear a certain piece of music or sometimes smells, they go straight to the memory, to the heart. And I cannot listen to one particular song that was played at my husband's funeral because I am instantly there. And I'm not too bad if I'm geared up for it, and I know it's in a concert or something, and I sort of can prime myself, then that's usually nowadays I can manage that. But if it just comes on the radio, or just I happened to be in a group of something and suddenly somebody started singing this and I had to pretend I needed the loo and disappear off, because it was too, I didn't think it was raw anymore, but the music just took me straight back into it. So anyway, I'm digressing a wee bit. Let's go on to the next one. Time is needed to grieve. Society is we're a fast-moving society. Let's have a McDonald's, let's have a quick meal, let's not do a long, slow dinner that takes an hour to prepare, or 2 hours, even more. We like everything sort of quick and neat and tidy. And it's the same with grief. For people are superb after the ceremony and after a funeral. And they're around, they're offering food, they're offering support. Inevitably, relatives have to go back home. Inevitably, after 4 weeks, 8 weeks, their own nitty-gritties of their own life have to take over. They're caught up in the messes of their own life. So they can't really remember, oh, hang on a minute, I really need to go and check on so-and-so and check they're not feeling well. And it might be very sporadic that they check in with you. But it's not because they don't care, it's just because they've got lost in their own messes and they're busy. And then the other bit is life as you know it. When you've had a bereavement, something has changed. Now, no matter how much you grieve, you can't make it go back to what it was. Loss has happened. And what you have to do is say, right, I have to somehow accommodate this and find a way of living comfortably with it, because I want my memories. And you have to remember, with bereavement and grief, not everybody has a lovely, happy memory of somebody. There's very complicated grief as well, whereby the person who has died or you've lost actually was someone who was exceedingly nasty to you in any sort of way. It may have been physical abuse, it may have been emotional abuse. Now, there's all sorts of feelings arise then when they pass, because you haven't necessarily been able to actually say to them, look, did you know what you did to me was wrong? Can you not apologize to me? Or you treated me like, even a discussion on it, you haven't had a chance to have that. So then when the person is gone, you're left with only your memories, which are quite hard for you to shift. And sometimes it helps to have someone help you talk through them, because it's easier to get them out then when the person is actually gone. But this idea that, others do go back to their own life, you have to find what structure works for you. I likened it to, it's a bit like somebody knocks down the walls of your house and you think, well, I don't know where to put them back up because my life's very different now. Oh, I hope that's not Lisa. But so yes, you have the walls in your life, and a young mother or a woman who was pregnant, desperately wanting a baby that she has lost, that although she might go on and have other babies, or she already has other babies, that does not stop her feeling exceeding grief for the one that she has lost. For a family group, if they lose a child, that's traumatic. As we get older in our lives, where you've been retired a long time together and you lose someone, they are the bedrock of your life, because the two of you share an inordinate amount of time all day, every day together, whether it's bickering and squabbling or having your little separate bits and pieces of the house to yourself. But, you're tied at the hip almost, and that can be very hard. I remember it was about a month, 2 weeks, actually it was less than a month, so it was 2 to 3 weeks after my husband died. I went back to work and they were absolutely horrified and saying, take 6 months off, take a year off. I said, look, I can't do it, because the one part my husband was not part of, the only bit of my life that works and functions is my work, because he was never here. So I can come in here, I can almost pretend it didn't happen, and I can go home again where I'm back in the emptiness and the mess. One daughter had to go back to London, the other had to go back to Australia. I find it so much infinitely easier to be able to just go in and hide in my work. And yet I have other friends who had at least a year off because they just emotionally felt they couldn't go in. But for me, work was a life raft. But when you get older, to an older stage of life, your togetherness is how you live. And that's very, very hard to get used to not having. And how do you rebuild your life at that stage of your life? So going on to the next one. This is new interventions, which is interesting. And I'm just looking. I think I might have left my little booklet I want to show you down on the desk at the back. I'll get it in a minute. Believe it or not, there's a death positive library. Now, this is happening in Northern Ireland. They are trying to open us up as a society to talk more, because that's half the battle. The number of times I've heard people who've been bereaved say, I was going along the road and I knew somebody crossed over the road rather than talk to me. And it's not because they're an unkind person. They haven't known what to say. In fact, at a previous talk I gave, someone actually asked the question, what do you say? Because you don't want to cause them distress, you don't want them to break down. And I said, just something simple like, I'm sorry for your pain. And you don't have to elaborate, and take your lead from them. Some people want to talk, some people it's the last thing they want to do because they're embarrassed if they break down. So it's about acknowledging it, because it is very hard. I remember when my father died, I went back into a school environment. I'd been off for a week to allow for, because of movement of places, there had to be 2 different funerals or services. But anyway, I went back into work, no one said a thing. And I thought, do they not know? But they must know, because the news came into the school very blandly to say, Hilary, your father's died. It wasn't delivered in a very subtle way. And I was deeply hurt, because I thought, how could someone not say to me, do they think nothing much has happened to me in the last week? And it was their desire to save me from being upset and breaking down. And when I realised that, the hurt went away. But initially I felt deeply, deeply wounded. How could they not know sort of the soreness and pain I was going through? But I got it wrong totally too, because when my father died, my 7-year-old daughter had just had her tonsils out, and I'd had a day or 2 off while she was in the rawness stage, but she was sort of the walking wounded. So I took her up to my mother and father's house. It was only about 5 miles away. This was in Scotland, and left her in with them at about 8:30 in the morning. And this call came into school by about 9:10 with the deputy rectors, they called in Scotland, coming to my door to say, oh, Hilary, we've just had a phone call, your father's died. And I'm thinking, first of all, taking in the shock myself, and then I thought, my daughter's up there. So I went herring up, breaking every speed limit known, to my parents' house, and my daughter was there. My father's body was still there. He dropped dead in the bathroom as he was shaving. He'd been getting checked for a possible heart murmur. He was going up to the doctors that day to get the results. Unfortunately, the results were immaterial. But my daughter had been sitting, she put the loo seat lid down, she was sitting, swinging her legs on the loo seat, talking away to her granddad. And years later, when she was 16, she was doing an essay that was saying, she said, I want to do an essay about my granddad's death. I said, are you sure, really? Yes, I do. It's a personal essay they have to write. So she said afterwards, do you want to read it? And I did. And I was ashamed, because she said in it, along with other things about her granddad, the day my granddad died, I knew he was shaving and he fell on the floor, and I knew he was dead. I don't know how she knew he was dead, but she says, I knew he was dead. And then Mummy came, and I quickly took her away to a neighbour's house to get her out of the situation. And while we got my father's body moved and everything, and she said, I thought it was horrible. I was sent away, and I was sent away till the afternoon, and then I was brought back, but I wasn't allowed to be part of it, and I think that's awful. And I had to apologise to my 16-year-old daughter, saying, I got that so wrong. I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you in this environment. I didn't want you to see the pain and the hurt. Children are more resilient than we think. What they don't like is to be left out. They can cope with the fact we're very sad, we're emotional, but they can't cope with you thinking you're protecting them and putting them somewhere else. So, and then bringing them back when it's all cleaned up. And that's where I think we've got into this sanitized version of things, that we're meant to protect people and keep them safe, but it is a normal part of life that goes on. So I digressed a bit. The Death Positive Library, I'm not sure I fully agree with the name. I think maybe it could be a bit tweaked, but it's been trialled out in Derry, Omagh and Newry. And what they do is they have books on grieving and death and bereavement, and they have it sort of a nice little display set out in the corner of the library so people can borrow them to actually get some help there. And then, sorry, I'm just checking the time that no, we're okay. Get some help, and the books are really very useful. So that's one new development, and the other libraries, I think, are following suit. Then, believe it or not, Ballymena phoned me up and said, would you like to come to a funeral festival? And I'm thinking, really? I'm not sure that I do. And they explained that it was gathering together different organisations, like there were going to be funeral undertakers, there was going to be Marie Curie, the Hospice Association. Because I had a book on bereavement, would I come along as well to show it? And I thought, oh, okay, I'll go. And I have to say, hand over heart, I was not that keen, and I thought, this is a bit eerie. Now, this is me even with all my background knowledge of all this, so, you know. And I went, it was to a very nice hotel in Ballymena, and it was a beautiful, bright lit room, really excellent. And as I went through the door, there were 5 coffins set out, a bit like, you know, a wardrobe store shop or a bed shop. You know, here's these, and I remember thinking, oh, right, because I've only ever really seen a coffin either with the lid down closed or where the lid's been left open so you can see the person. And I really wasn't sure about it, so I tiptoed my way around it and got my stall and sort of periodically looked across. You know, by the time it got to lunchtime and several of us were talking, it was like, well, you know, actually, I quite like the white one. You know, that willow one was really rather nice. No, I think the dark wood is better. I like the handles on that one. And it made it so mundane. It wasn't this absolutely... And don't get me wrong, it did seem scary and spooked me a bit when I went into this row of very artistically arranged 5 of them coffins. But it became mundane, and that's where we need to go with bereavement and with thoughts of death and grieving. It should be mundane because we all have it at some point. And then My Peace of Mind planner, which I'll just do it on the coffins and get it on the back of it. Because that's another good thing. That would be interesting. I stuck it in a book thinking I brought it up to the front with me. Now, oh, by the way, that's the book. But this is called My Peace of Mind Planner. And it's Age Well is the partnership. And it was on the back of this funeral festival that they had. They developed this. But actually, it is brilliant because what it does is it gives you all the important things you might have to think about that you don't want to think about. And you take one and you fill it in. Make sure you tell some member of your family where it's lurking and go on with your life and forget about it. End of life care choices. I remember when my mother was ill with pneumonia at age 90, she was asked did she want to be resuscitated or not, and she said no, certainly not. And we were surprised because we'd never had that discussion with her. She actually survived pneumonia and lasted another 4 years. But legal things, funeral plans. Have any of us made one? Do you know what you want? Bank accounts. How easy is that? Passwords or things to different accounts. Insurance details. Email, social media, and phone details. The stuff that makes life, and actually thinking back to my husband, the stuff that makes getting things and paperwork sorted very, very hard because you haven't a clue. Pets. Some people have wonderful pets that are their pride and joy and the other important person, as I said, in their lives. Most important, my possessions. Loved ones I wish to give them to. So that could be interesting. Do you really want that particular watch going to somebody? Do you want that vase you think is the most wonderful thing going to somebody else? I suppose if you're really being naughty, that thing that you hate, well, just give it to somebody. Not a good thing like that. And just final notes. But I thought, isn't that wonderful? Now, I have this one, which I intend filling in. I haven't filled it in yet because it takes a certain... I've looked at it and thought, yes, I need to fill it in. But even down to, at the funeral I was at there just last Wednesday of the close friend, a beautiful picture on the front of the funeral schedule. And I thought, now I wonder who picked that for him. Because at a meeting, at a talk I gave a couple of weeks ago, this lovely lady said, I've all sorted, I've picked the picture I want. I'm not having any of my children picking a picture of me to put on the front. And not only that, I've actually filled in everything because my granddaughter lives quite away from me. And she said, Grandma, have you done anything about what you want when you die? And she said, no. She said, I think you should because we don't know what you want. And actually, it is as simple as that. You know, we can do things for ourselves and then leave it for our loved ones to find and hopefully do exactly what we want. I sometimes hear a nice piece of music on the radio and I sometimes jot it down on a scrap of paper in the car and it lurks around there for 6 months. And then I tidy out the car and the scrap of paper goes away and I lose it. So going on to the book, this is the sort of format. There's a small paragraph at the top and then a little note to self. So that's 1 page, 1 day. Nothing too complex and detailed. I put this in just because I think it sums up a bit what happens to you when you're grieving. Grieving is like traveling through a fog. There are no markers showing a clear path. It's difficult to work out what on earth your road ahead is. In reality, you don't need to see the whole picture of how your life is going to pan out. It's far too overwhelming. So really, all you need to see is the next little bit of road with the headlights of the car illuminating that small patch ahead. Everything else is in darkness. That's what our fog lights do. And we happily drive through fog, relying on the wee bit of road we can see in front of us and nothing else. And we trust it. You trust the next portion of road will gradually emerge as the highlights move forward, headlights. And that's the way you move through grief. You can really only focus on this little bit. If you try to say, but what am I going to do? And in the first months, where am I going to live? Am I going to move house? Am I going to near this relative, that relative? Am I going to get somebody else to move in with me? Am I going to give up my job? Am I going to... forget it all, just take each little step. And it's the same regardless whether it's a broken partnership or whatever. It's important to focus on a little bit at a time. So then, and there would have been a little note to self under that. And these, I apologise for the photography, it was a bit not exactly accurate. So at this side, it's saying, and that's very true, grief is exhausting. Anyone who has been bereaved, the one thing you will guarantee is you are tired a lot of the time. Grief is exhausting. There may be all sorts of questions in your head, and you've no answers. And initially, memories are so raw and painful. It can actually be, they're lovely things, but you're not ready for them because it's just reminding you, I've lost that person. So initially, memories can actually be quite sore. Memories may seem to bombard you, overwhelming feelings of loss. I'm trying to read this sideways on. May crash over your waves. You may feel that you cannot imagine what the rest of your life will be like living with this loss. It's helpful to keep reminding yourself to go back to just living one day at a time. That's all. So the wee note to self is, at times I seem to be able to live one day at a time, but then I start looking at the future ahead and become overwhelmed. Oh, I've all these years ahead left of me living on my own. Oh, and you don't know what life has ahead. The one thing I ask everybody who is grieving and bereaved to remember is, if you think of the people that you know who have passed, a lot of them, the majority I would say, would have been so desperately eager for more time. More days, more months, more years. They were not ready to give up on their life. So to me, the people who are left almost have an obligation to enjoy and live their lives in a way that honours the people you've known before, because they'd have given anything to have more time. And for us to hide away and waste our lives doesn't seem appropriate, because they would gladly have swapped and said, right, well, I'll carry on and take your life for a little while. We haven't reached that stage, thank heaven, of technology. And then just another one, an example. After a while, it seems such a long time that you last saw the person you've lost. And there's longing, there's loneliness. It's very hard to accept, and you'd give anything for a phone call just to hear the voice. I know my daughter kept the last phone message, her voicemail her father had sent her for years. I'm sure it was about 8 years after he'd died, and eventually, you know, it got beyond it, getting passed on over the next phone and the next phone as she renewed. But it just was something tangible she could hold on to and listen to. It's hard to be organised in the middle of grieving. Decisions about the future again. You could, I think, can you read that out or not? No, right. It may seem such a long time since you last saw the person you've lost. Everyday tasks take over, so you have to buy articles for the house or organise appointments. It can be hard to be organised in the middle of grieving. That first time you actually have to get a new carpet or change the car, or in my case, get a lawnmower, which was not ideal. So I look for and accept support to help me deal with the organisation of my life and paperwork. And there's the last couple of examples just. Life cannot sit still, and therefore changes come in. Some of which seem good while others seem frightening. It can be difficult to adapt to change, which is not of your own making, but has been foisted on you. It's easy to build up a belief that change is fearful, and so feel that you have been lifted up and shaken around. Sometimes you've no choice but to roll with the changes presented to you, rather than fighting them. And then the note to self, I roll with change, accepting that while it may cause a feeling of fear, life cannot remain fixed and static. The natural law of nature is everything evolves and changes. In nature, You can't stop it. It automatically goes into the next cycle of growth and regrowth. We're the same. We can't hold back time. Bad things, sad things have happened, and you have to carry on changing and evolving. You can't sort of stay, well, I'm not changing, I'm staying just exactly the way I am now. It doesn't happen. And then the last one, special events such as birthdays and anniversaries continue to be difficult, and especially first time around. You're so aware of the loss you've experienced and the person who is missing from your life. Gradually, the ache will fade, but the loss is a memory which will not be erased. You're not going to forget the person. They were so meaningful to you, hopefully in a good way. For some people, maybe in a not so good way, but you will never forget them. But what you do is learn to live with the memory in a nice place or a better place that you can enjoy your memories. I accept there is pain in experiencing birthdays and anniversaries, but I am grateful to have some happy memories to look back on when I feel ready to. The first anniversary after my husband died, one daughter was in Australia and couldn't come home. The other daughter was in London. So we planned, right, we'd have a day in London and we would try and do something nice to make up for the awful day it had been the year before. Because she had to fly up from London and ended up at about 11 o'clock at night. That same day, my husband had died. She wanted to see his body in the mortuary that night. So it wasn't a good memory. So we went and decided we'd have a day in a spa in London. And we went there in trepidation, thinking this is going to be so awful, you know, knuckles trailing the ground, thinking, oh, I don't know why we're doing this. We had a lovely day because we had planned what we were going to do. We didn't let the day sneak up and ambush ourselves. We planned something that would be thoughtful and nice, that would help us relax. And we both at the end of that day thought, you know what, that wasn't so bad. And we didn't actually visit the grave on that day. We did it a different time, but a lot of people would want to go and visit the grave or visit a book of condolence or something. So you have to plan it though, what you feel you would like. I think that's just the stages of grief I'd touched on. If I go back to that one, death of a spouse is 100 in points of maximum stress. It's the highest stressed event you can have. Divorce is at 73. A marital separation is at 65. Death of a close family member is 63, and so on, just in a list of stressors. So that's the book, and you know, death and grieving, I think comedians could have a field day. They maybe do, I don't know that many comedians, but there's all sorts of black humour associated with death and dying too. It really is weird. And you have to accept the humour that's in it as well. I remember I had my husband's ashes and I had to go to Edinburgh for a meeting, but I was flying back over to Northern Ireland to put his ashes in the grave. And I was sort of talking to him all the way along, and then I said, you know, I'm not quite sure I'm comfortable with the ashes coming into a hotel room with me. If you don't mind, I'll sort of leave you behind the chair in the car and hope nobody steals you, because I sort of don't quite, I'm new to this, and I don't quite know. You know, the funeral undertaker at 3 o'clock had handed them over to me, and I had to go off to a meeting in Edinburgh, and I felt guilty, but I thought, I'm not sure I can cope. I don't think I could sleep with, you know, it's a lovely wooden box and in a nice presentation bag and everything. But anyway, so that was bad enough that day. The next day, then, to tell you where the black humour comes in, I left the car at Prestwick Airport to fly back to Belfast Airport, and I thought, I can't put the ashes in, I only had a small case, I'll take them with me in the bag. So going through security, this very officious girl goes, oh, yeah, put coat, belt, what's in the bag? Actually, it's my husband's ashes. And she was horrified. And I thought, well, it is. So I didn't have to take him through security scan. They sort of whipped the bag round to the other side. Then I got on the plane and I'm looking at my height and I'm looking at the height of where you put your bags. And I'm thinking, I can't put them up there. And if I try putting him up there and it tips out and he's scattered up the passageway of an aeroplane, it's not the ending you'd really envisaged. So, you know, that's what I mean, where in the middle of all the deep, deep pain and sadness, there are times where actually you'll giggle and laugh. So I think on that note, I will stop talking. If there's anybody who wants to ask any questions, feel free. I know you might feel, you know what, no, I don't really like talking about it, and that's perfectly fine as well. No? Okay.